Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought in War Thunder today we'd have a look at a new user model and user mission, which was created by Beckett, and also the user mission created by Father Gentlespeed. This is the Chrysler TV-8, and it is a vehicle which, well, to be honest, a lot of people have been talking about for a long time because of its weird and wonderful design. We're actually going to, in this video, look at its history, where it came from, and also why this weird and wacky design was actually called for, while also giving you some, general feedback on how the model acts in War Thunder. On top of this as well, this is a vehicle which I doubt will ever come to the game in any real capacity, unless Gaijin's policies change on, let's call them, not finished vehicles. This vehicle was only ever a proposal, and they only made a full-size mock-up of it, and they never actually went through with the production of the vehicle, since Chrysler decided against it. Anyway, let's go into some of the history of the vehicle, and what spurred Chrysler to make such a weird and wacky design. So the story of the Chrysler TV-8 actually starts from an odd place. It starts from a project which the Chrysler Corporation actually pulled out of before producing the TV-8 project. So in January of 1953, the Army Chief of Staff dated a memorandum which noted that the policy required, going forward when it came to tank development, that research and development of new equipment would follow two parallel paths. The first was the continuous improvement of existing material by a process of evolution, and the second path was the long-range development of new solutions to military problems utilizing entirely new types of equipment. So in the latter case, it was considered that the usual system of submitting a list of military characteristics for a required item tended to inhibit the full exploitation of any new ideas that might be forthcoming. So therefore, it was directed that contracts be awarded to firms with recognized research and engineering staffs for the development of an X-weapon. And this X-weapon would perform the role of a medium tank. An X-weapon was also to be available for production no later than 1958, so they had pretty much 5 years to propose and get ready for a production run, and this date was then changed to 1961 though, so they had about 8 years to create something. These instructions were recorded in the Ordnance Technical Committee minutes by item 34753. This was dated the 24th of April 1953, and the OTCM 34753 was given the name Astron to identify the project and indicated that at least 2 of the contracts should be with major automotive companies experienced in tank design and production. The contractors were to be responsible for studying the X-weapon as a complete unit without restrictions being placed on any components. So there were 17 proposals and bids which were received from industries in response to the request, and these proposals were renewed at Detroit Arsenal and at the Pentagon during May and June. And the ordnance was directed to place contracts with the General Motors Technical Center and also the Chrysler Corporation. So you can see just from this and the idea of this Astron project, it was pretty much, okay, so we're going to put some resources towards kind of retrofitting some of the old equipment that we have in the 50s, try and modernize it, try and make it better, but over here in the Astron project, it is time for you to go balls to the wall, for you to go forward and just create anything wacky that you want to do, as long as it makes sense, for a futuristic army, which is what we're looking for. So there was really no restrictions, there was nothing which they could look for and go, okay, well maybe we don't want to do that. That would come after the process of proposal and design. So even though, the General Motors Technical Center and also the Chrysler Corporation were offered these contracts, on the 7th of December 1953, Chrysler actually withdrew from the competition because of other engineering commitments. So since the Continental Motors Corporation had presented a very interesting proposal, they were awarded the second contract which replaced Chrysler. And in addition to the 2 contracts with the industry, the engineering staff of the Ordnance Tank Automotive Command at Detroit Arsenal also participated in the project. So the concepts developed by all three of these were presented in a meeting at the Pentagon on the 17th and the 18th of May 1955. So these pretty much all came together in 1955. The idea of them eventually was to produce them in 1961 if they went into full production, and there are some actually really interesting ideas. The General Motors one itself I thought was really interesting. There was also some ideas where you would create this vehicle which would be basically two parts and you could split the parts, but that is for another video. Today we're obviously talking about the TV-8. Maybe in the future I'll do a video just looking at all of these different projects, because to be honest they are fascinating. So where does the TV-8 fit into all of this? Because obviously Chrysler pulled out of the Astron program, or at least from the contract from the program. Well, after the meeting on the 17th and 18th of May, Chrysler Corporation presented a separate proposal for an unusual tank designated as the TV-8, which is the one you see before you. This design put the entire crew, armament, power plant in a pod-shaped turret mounted above a lightweight chassis. The total weight of this design was estimated to be about 25 tons, and 15 tons of it were in the turret and 10 tons on the chassis. The two were separable for shipment by air, so you could actually be able to move it around the place, or at least that was generally the idea. The TV-8 itself was going to be armed with the 90mm gun, the T-208. It would be rigidly mounted in the turret and fitted with a hydraulic ramming device. The 90mm ammunition stowage would be in the rear of the turret, separated from the crew by a steel bulkhead, and secondary armaments consisted of two coaxial 30 caliber machine guns and one remote controlled 50 caliber machine gun, which would be on the top of the turret, operated by the tank commander. There was also a closed-circuit television. It was provided to protect the crew from the flash of tactical nuclear weapons and to increase the field of vision, so they could also stay inside. And on phase 1 of the TV-8, a Chrysler V8 engine developing 300 gross horsepower was coupled to an electric generator in the rear of the turret, and this generator would supply power to two other electric motors in the front of the hull. One motor drive each of the two 28-inch wide tracks. Other power plants were considered for later development. This included a gas turbine electric drive, a vapor cycle power plant with hydrocarbon fuels, and then finally a vapor cycle power plant with nuclear fuel. So this is where the idea of this thing being a nuclear tank comes from. One of the proposed ideas was to have a vapor cycle power plant powered by nuclear fuel. But generally, if we have a look at it, this thing would have probably just had a Chrysler V8 engine, and that would have been about it. The fuel tanks for phase 1 of the vehicle were located in the hull, separating them from the crew in the turret, and the space was provided in the heavily armored inner turrets for a crew of 4. There was only 2 really required, though, to actually operate the tank, in the form of the gunner and the driver, and these 2 were located in the front, at the right and left of the cannon respectively. The driver could operate fully protected inside the turret, or with his head and shoulders exposed above the roof, and the tank commander was at the right rear with the loader on his left. The heavily armored inner turret was surrounded by a light outer shell that gave the turret its pod-like appearance, and this shell was watertight, and this actually meant that it would create sufficient displacement to allow the vehicle to float. So yes, what you are seeing before you is technically an amphibious design, which is really interesting. So with this idea of the amphibious nature, there was a propulsion system put in place. A water jet pump would be installed in the bottom rear of the turret. The outer turret shell was of sufficient thickness to detonate shaped charge rounds, and it acted as spaced armor to help protect the inner turret. The turret was supported by an assembly which rotated in a ring in the whole roof, and it was moved in elevation by 2 large hydraulic cylinders. The TV-8 was 352 inches long, with the gun forward, 134 inches wide, and 115 inches high over the remote-controlled machine gun. So the 3 Astron proposals that we talked about before, as well as the TV-8 design, they were all reviewed, and it was concluded that they did not offer sufficient advantages over the conventional medium gun tank to justify further developments. So this was actually confirmed on the 23rd of April 1956. This also terminated the Astron program. So even though it was terminated though, the OTCM indicated that consideration would be given to the novel features of the Astron proposals and the TV-8 in the design of future tanks. So even though a lot of people class this as an Astron tank, it isn't an Astron tank. It's kind of an excess on top of the other 3 proposals that went around the place. And it is one of them, if we actually have a look at it compared to, you know, the other 3 proposals, it was probably the one that made it the furthest because of the fact that there was a full-size mock-up made of it. But also understand how interesting, you know, the whole idea was, where you have this outer shell and then you have this inner shell, which was the more armored part of it. The fact that, you know, you had this weird and wonderful track relay, the 90mm, of course, in the turret of the whole thing. There is just a really interesting vehicle here, and it's really sad that it's another one of these vehicles which is very similar to a lot of other designs that came out of America from, you know, the late 40s to the 70s, which can never really come into game because of the fact that it was only ever, you know, a proposal and then eventually a mock-up. Maybe if the ideas, as I said, of Gaijin change, we can see vehicles like this, and it would be interesting to see how a vehicle like this would fare in the game with the fact of how, you know, its turret works. I've got a feeling it wouldn't fare too well, especially against stuff such as APFS-DS, but you never know when it comes to, you know, these weird and wacky designs. Anyway, that is the TV-8 Chrysler. Hopefully, one day we see it in some capacity, maybe as an April Fool's vehicle, with the aliens landing, coming down to annihilate us all. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, and also Elove Goat and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.